Hey, I'm Dorian. In this episode, I'm going to teach you how to improve your shading. Drawing is difficult because the world is complex. But as we study nature, we see principles at work that we can understand and make use of. One such principle describes how light interacts with form. You might think you understand this, but chances are that you're wrong in a subtle but remarkable way. Let's simplify this head into flat planes. Can you see that each plane has a particular brightness? Artists call this brightness the tonal value of a surface, or value for short. This value is lightest where the form is facing towards the light source, and the value darkens as the form turns away from the light source. This might sound familiar if you've studied shading, but there's a lot more you need to know. To become a master, you have to understand how the light and the plane interact. Every surface has a direction, and the light has a direction as well. There's an angle between the direction of the surface and the direction of the light. We call this the angle of incidence. If we rotate this plane so it faces straight up, the angle of incidence is 0 degrees. The light is hitting our plane with full force, so the brightness we get on the plane is 100%. Now, let's rotate the plane away from the light source. As the angle of incidence increases, the brightness decreases. Finally, at 90 degrees, the light no longer hits our plane and the surface falls into shadow. So, at 90 degrees of inclination, we have 0% brightness. Now, here's my big question to you. How much brightness do we have at 80 degrees of inclination? If we rotate this plane towards the light by 10 degrees, how much brightness do we gain? We go from 0% to what? Take a piece of paper now and write down your best guess. Go ahead and pause the video if you need a moment. You will only learn the main lesson of this video if you actually stop and think about this. Ready? Okay, here we go. At 80 degrees of rotation, we have 45% brightness. Yes, really. The first time I did this exercise, I estimated we would have 10% brightness, maybe something between 10 and 15%. That's intuitive, but what actually happens in nature is this dramatic jump. Now let's go to the opposite extreme. We're back at 0 degrees rotation and we have 100% brightness. How much brightness do we end up with if we rotate the plane away from the light source by 10 degrees? Pause again and write down a number. Ready? At 10 degrees rotation, we go from 100% brightness down to 99%. How is that possible? Well, here's the entire scale. 100, 99, 97, 94, 89, 82, 73, 62, 45, and 0. This, my friends, is Lambert's emission law. It is named after Johann Heinrich Lambert, a Swiss polymath. Fun fact, I'm also Swiss, but I'm not great at math. This image shows a linear value scale with even steps going from 100 to 90, 80, 70, and so forth until 0. That's what we would expect, but what happens in nature is this: 100, 99, 97, 94, 89, 82, 73, 62, 45, 0. We can call this a Lambert scale. And here is what this means for us. In shading, the tones change very slowly near the lightest lights. They begin to darken more dramatically as they approach the terminator.
Trust me.
The terminator is the edge between light and shadow. You can see how subtle the value change is in the lightest area on this planar sphere. In fact, if we place our two scales on top of the sphere, you can see how the linear scale gets way too dark, way too early. And check out this graph. The tone changes slowly as the form turns away from the light. But the closer we get to the shadow, the faster it darkens. This curve follows a cosine function. On the other hand, the linear scale progresses from light to shadow in a straight line. Don't worry if you don't know about cosines. You will still be able to apply this principle to your drawings. This might give you a new appreciation for some artists. It is possible to communicate a tremendous amount of form change with a very limited range of values. This requires sensitivity and control. You can develop both of these through practice. Here are a few of my works from my student days, and you can make strong drawings from observation without even knowing about Lambertian fall-off. I didn't know back then, but if you do know this, you can save so much time. Instead of guessing your shading, simply begin with the most noticeable value change, right next to the terminator.
Trust me.
Understanding this also helps you to avoid two common shading mistakes. The first mistake is to make the light halftones too dark. This results in what we can call dirty lights.
Ugh.
You're ruining the light effect if you go too dark too soon. To maintain a convincing sense of light, you have to make the value change in the light values very subtle. These are clean lights, and these are dirty lights. Can you see the difference? Dirty lights mean that your light halftones are too dark. The lights appear too similar to the shadows. Clean lights mean that you are respecting Lambertian fall-off. You're describing form convincingly and separating the light family from the shadow family. The second mistake is to not make the dark halftones dark enough. When you do this, you will see a light ring or a halo next to your terminator. Watch out for this in your shading. It means that you haven't drawn the dramatic drop of value just before the terminator. The way to fix it is to darken the values of the dark halftones until the light ring disappears. So here is before and after. See how much more round and convincing the drawing looks when the dark halftones are dark enough? This next mistake isn't related to Lambertian fall-off, but I want to throw it in because it's so common and so destructive. The third common shading mistake is to make reflected lights within the shadows too bright. When we draw from observation, we're often tempted to draw the reflected lights too strongly, too brightly. When we do this, the illusion of form is lost because the reflected light starts looking like halftones. So a good rule of thumb is to draw the reflected lights a little more subtly than what you see in front of you, or what you think you see in front of you. Here is before and after. Remember that rule that Stan has mentioned so many times? The lightest dark is darker than the darkest light. Make sense? Check out the links in the description for those lessons. Alright.